Ralph Graham Collections. I'm sorry? Is it not on? It is? Okay, good. My name is Gabe Wilson, and I'm the Jean and Ralph Graham Collections Fellow here at the Cranbrook Art Museum and curator of the exhibition Ruth Adler Schnee, Modern Designs for Living on view upstairs. I'm so happy to be here and to introduce today's speaker, Deborah Lubera Kawsky. Before I go any further, I'd also like to thank a number of funders to this project, the exhibition and catalog, the Graham Foundation for Advanced Studies in the Fine Arts, the Maxine and Stuart Frankel Foundation, and the Clanad Foundation and Graham family. Debbie was an invaluable resource throughout the conception and development of this project. As I got to know Ruth's work, her fascinating biography and legacy in Detroit, and the designer herself. A tireless advocate of Ruth's career, Debbie continues to elevate Adler Schnee's central role in the canon of mid-century modernism. Her enthusiasm and deep knowledge of the subject were a boon at every stage, and the chapter on Ruth's biography she contributed to the exhibition catalog was a key component in telling the whole of Ruth Adler Schnee's story at last. She thoroughly and vibrantly illustrated Ruth's life from her birth in Frankfurt am Main, Germany, to her dynamic career here in Michigan. I am grateful for this and for her lasting friendship with Ruth, which she continues to enrich this project and its related programming. She is the Ruth Whisperer, and I am confident that this long overdue retrospective is that much more gratifying to Ruth for Debbie's involvement. Deborah Lubera Kawsky completed her undergraduate studies at Smith College and her Ph.D. in art history at Princeton University. She is an Adjunct Associate Professor of art history at Madonna University, where she is actively involved in community outreach projects in the Metro Detroit community. As a board member of DACO-MOMO, Michigan, she has coordinated events relating to Detroit art, architecture, and urbanism. Kawsky's book, Alexander Gerard, Architect, Creating Mid-Century Modern Masterpieces, published by Wayne State University Press in 2018, is the first study of Gerard's architectural works in Detroit. Her upcoming lectures include 2 presentations of Detroit's Design DNA, which celebrates For Modern Living, a groundbreaking 1949 exhibition of modern design for the home, which included textiles by Ruth Adler Schnee and inspired the title of our exhibition, and its impact on Detroit designers for the homes of today and tomorrow. She will present the lecture on Sunday, March 22nd at the Grosse Pointe War Memorial, and on Thursday, April 30th, as part of Detroit Design Corps' Lunch and Learn series. As I said before, she is also one of the contributors to the museum's publication, Ruth Adler Schnee, Modern Designs for Living, produced in conjunction with our current exhibition. Very beautiful. Copies of which are currently available at our front desk bookshelf for purchase. Also, if you haven't had a chance to walk through the current exhibition, it will be open today until 5 p.m. and closes 2 weeks from today on March 15th. Before I hand it over to Deborah, I want to remind everyone that we're collecting stories about Ruth from her community in Detroit. If you have any memories of time spent in their store, Adler Schnee Associates, or personal interactions you'd like to share, please leave them with us at the table near the auditorium entrance up at the top of the stairs. We'd love to collect these personal accounts to document her impact on the city and to share with Ruth. Thank you again, and please join me in welcoming Deborah Lubera Kawsky.
Thank you. I first met Ruth Adler Schnee in 2011 when I was doing research for a book I was writing on Alexander Gerard's architecture. At the time, I really had no idea how much our lives and careers would intersect. Over the past 9 years, I've been privileged to serve not only as a close friend, but also as a witness to and a documenter and promoter of Ruth's amazing life and design career, thereby granting me a special insight into her legacy today and tomorrow. That's why I was especially grateful to be asked to contribute an essay on Ruth's life to the exhibition catalog and to speak with you all this afternoon. I recall being present at what one might call the conception of the current exhibition of Ruth's work. It was April of 2018, and I had transported Ruth to the opening of the World of Charles and Ray Eames exhibition at the Henry Ford. We had a standing design date for every major opening in the area. And you see us at the left with Lucia Atwood, who is one of the Eames grandchildren. While the walk down the long hallways was tiring, Ruth was, as always, invigorated by the exhibition itself. sharing her personal reminiscences of visiting Charles and Ray Eames in their magnificent Santa Monica home back in 1954. After seeing and striking up a conversation with Cranbrook Art Museum director Andrew Blauvelt, Ruth asked him point blank, "Why hasn't Cranbrook done an exhibition of my work yet?" He answered that Cranbrook was, in fact, very interested. Bright and early the next morning, I got a call from Ruth, right as I was walking into my son's college graduation ceremony at Michigan State University. Of course, I answered the call. Ruth never has and never will use email. She wanted to know the phone number of the museum director, as she was determined to follow up on the previous night's conversation. She wanted to make sure that the exhibition became a reality. Of course, the exhibition did become a reality, and I know for a fact that the opening of Ruth Adler Schnee Modern Designs for Living at Cranbrook, the place she credits with shaping her artistic vision, is one of her proudest moments as a designer. On that note, Ruth has asked me, and I actually have her live on the phone right now, so while I keep looking down at my phone to make sure it's still on, she has asked me to thank everyone at Cranbrook on her behalf, from Art Museum Director Andrew Blauvelt, Exhibition Curator Gabe Wilson, along with Greg Whitcobb, Deborah Rice, and Laura Newman from the Center for Collections, to say how sorry she is to not be with us today. And I second all of those thank yous. Today, I will provide an overview of Ruth's life, career, and legacy, which I will admit is a tall order in an hour lecture, so I may go a little bit over. I encourage everyone who wasn't at the screening last month to view the film The Radiant Sun, and also to read the exhibition catalog for more details. I will structure my lecture today on an observation that I made while writing my catalog essay, which is aptly entitled Threads, which is the name of a 1995 ANZEA textile design. The observation, evident in Ruth's own words on screen, was that Ruth's textile designs were deeply intertwined with events in her life story and her design career. So I'll read the quote. "These continuous strands are the yarns I use in needlework, or the course of one's life as it is bent, spliced, looped, entangled, or interrupted by fate. This design is symbolic of my search to find my own vision in a process that can be chaotic, conflicting, and sometimes inspiring." So what I decided to do today, and also in my essay, is to use 3 of Ruth's textiles, Threads, Germination, and My Neighborhood, all featured in the exhibition upstairs, to illustrate different phases of Ruth's life and design career. However, there's another underlying theme to my lecture, one which derives from Ruth's 1946 Cranbrook MFA thesis, which is also published in the exhibition catalog. In it, she stated boldly, quote, "The new is now." Indeed, I argue that throughout her nearly 10 decades, Ruth has time and again broken new ground, both in her personal life and in her work, making her a truly inspirational figure, not only for me, but for others. So let's start with Threads, as this textile reminds me of a favorite story that Ruth often tells about an argument that she had with her mother when she was 5 years old. The story vividly demonstrates both her precocious aesthetic awareness — I'm sure most of us didn't have this type of argument — and her relentless quest for the new. At the time, the Adlers lived in an apartment in Frankfurt, and young Ruth objected to the eclectic nature of the family's home decor. Ruth recalls, "I could never understand how my mother, who was a Bauhaus graduate, could have an old-fashioned Biedermeier furniture mixed with modern pieces." With a smile, she recalls her mother's response, quote, "When you get older, you will appreciate that one mixes the old with the new. As long as it's well designed, it's like a beautiful bouquet of flowers," unquote. In a 2002 interview conducted by her own daughter, Anita Schnee, Ruth referenced the lesson as, quote, "the thread in my life," a metaphor that inspired the 1995 textile design of the same name. In fact, one might say that the story of Ruth Adler Schnee is itself a rich tapestry composed of various threads, people, experiences, and guiding principles, which shaped her unique personal and artistic vision. Growing up in Germany, young Ruth absorbed the intellectual, artistic, and musical interests of her parents and of their circle of family and friends. A few examples: Joseph Adler's family had run an antiquarian bookshop in Frankfurt, and we see a photo of that on the left. And I found in some writings of Ruth's father a description of the bookstore as a treasure trove for bibliophiles. And I view that as, even though Ruth never went to that store, it's a prescient precursor of the Ruth Adler Schnee store so many decades later. Marie Solomon Adler, Ruth's mother, had actually studied at the Bauhaus, and I have in the upper right corner is a photo from a book entitled Bauhaus Women. Ruth had a sticky note by this photo, so I don't know for a fact whether that's her mother in the photo or not, but she definitely studied at the Bauhaus. This upbringing offered similarly unique childhood experiences, such as the opportunity for young Ruth to design her own couture dresses. If you look in the front of this Adler Solomon extended family photo, this is Ruth with this smocked green silk dress that she said she designed it herself and her mother had it made in Paris. She also was very much impacted as a child by visits to the studio of artist Paul Klee. I'll get to the next slide, who was a family friend. Not many of us have family friends like that. And this is another coat that Ruth made and designed herself and then had it made. There are also some darker childhood experiences, including her visit to the infamous, we'll get to this in the next slide, Degenerate Art Exhibition in 1937. Before we get to that, I just want to point out one of these childhood drawings done by Ruth for the imaginary Svinagal family, and you can see textiles and light fixtures and everything. Even then, total design. Here we see an advertisement for the Degenerate Art Exhibition. She insisted on going, even though her parents were afraid that they were taking lists of names of people who were attending, and so they kind of shoved a hat down over her face and said, "No one will recognize you." And she was very much impacted by the bold colors and forms that she saw, which were supposed to be things you shouldn't do, right? That was the whole point of the exhibition. Coming from a family of German Jews, Ruth had a front seat for some of the 20th century's most horrific events, including the rise of Hitler and the ensuing Holocaust. Ruth has vivid memories of her family's possessions being smashed on Kristallnacht, and for her father actually being taken to the Dachau concentration camp. On the upper right is a Paul Signac painting that was actually torn up by the Nazis, and the family meticulously had it restored, and it's one of Ruth's most cherished possessions. More importantly, Ruth also witnessed the heroism of her mother, who not only got their father back from the camp, but also arranged to have their belongings repaired and secured visas for the family's 1939 emigration to America. This spirit of perseverance in the face of crisis would inspire Ruth to face challenges later in life. And in fact, despite all of the family crises and struggles, they always envisioned a brighter future. In the words that Ruth penned in a journal during their journey to America, she was optimistic. She described her walk across the landing bridge from the ship to New York City, which she described as the land of mechanism, as a long dream that had finally become a reality. And this is Ruth's actual journal that's in the Center for Collections here at Cranbrook, and you can actually view the pages online. The Adler family struggled financially after their arrival in their new home of Detroit, Michigan. One thing that they did for money, Ruth's mother, this is an actual Detroit News article, she took pressed flowers and made these decorative lampshades that actually were sold by various distributors across the country, and I would love to have one. I don't know if they're still around, probably not. Ruth's artistic talents were nurtured in the fall of 1939 at Cass Tech High School in Detroit, which offered classes in drawing, perspective, and costume design. In fact, Ruth used her Cass Tech costume designs, which you see in the upper right, and a dress that she had designed to win a full scholarship to the Rhode Island School of Design, or RISD. In this new creatively charged phase of her life, she looked outside of her family circle for new threads. And I felt like this whole creative period would be aptly illustrated by her textile germination. Starting with her enrollment at RISD in the fall of 1942, Ruth would encounter new artistic and educational mentors and new design philosophies, which allowed her to cultivate her own artistic vision, but also to create the personal and professional relationships that she needed for her later design career. The process started at RISD when she transferred from the costume design program to interior design and architecture. And that was a pretty bold move because at the time, architecture offices were not hiring women, and they were not hiring, in particular, Jewish women. So that demonstrates two key facts about Ruth. One is her interest in the integration of the arts, which may be something that was influenced by her mother's Bauhaus training, but also her stubborn refusal to follow the easy path. RISD offered a strong foundation. As you can see, here are some wonderful drawings that she did. This one is a design for a chair, and I can't read it right now, but I think you could push a button and like another part of the chair would pop out. I don't think she ever produced that, but it sounds kind of cool. She was very much influenced by sculptor calligrapher John Howard Benson, who said famously, "Design is all around. You don't have to go very far, just look." And that's a mantra that would remain constant throughout Ruth's career. 1945 was central to the evolution of Ruth's career, beginning with her graduation from RISD in May. On June 8, 1945, she received a letter saying that she had won honorable mention in the CONDE NAST Prix de Paris competition, which offered winners opportunities in design-related careers in Paris. But of course, it was wartime, so Paris was out of the question. So instead, they were sent to positions in New York City. Ruth was placed in the antiques department of the Lord & Taylor's department store, an opportunity which she rejected after 2 days, saying, "It was not my métier." Another bold move, but this one actually paid off. Condé Nast set up an alternate interview for her in the offices of Raymond Loewy, who we see at center, who was known for designing iconic corporate logos for the Shell Oil, Coca-Cola, and Lucky Strike corporations. After an interview in which Ruth was basically seated at a drafting table and told, "Show me what you can do," she landed a dream job as an assistant designer. This shows a view of the office, and I think this is her writing, saying this is where I was working, and on the left is the one of the letters from Condé Nast. Oh, not yet. Let's stay here. In a postcard dated July 11, 1945, Ruth wrote to her parents, quote, "I am so happy I could squeak. I have learned more in the past 2 days than I've learned in 2 years at RISD." She also states, "I am amazed by my ability. I have gone so modern." Surprisingly undaunted by her status as the lone woman designer in an office of 50 male architects, Ruth excelled, forging lifelong personal and professional connections with colleagues Minoru Yamasaki and Warren Platner. All three would end up in Detroit. Towards the end of the summer of 1945, Ruth received a one-year fellowship, likely the first given to a Jewish woman, in the architectural design program at Cranbrook Art Academy. So this was an MFA program. She was not eager to accept. In fact, you can't really read it very well, but in this letter that's in the archives, there's several places she's saying, I really hate to go to Cranbrook, I really can't offer as much as I have here. She's kind of hinting that she's not going to go, but her parents sent her a one-way train ticket, so that was pretty much the end of that. The Cranbrook curriculum centered on Ariel Saarinen's belief that art and design cannot be taught, it must be learned, was the polar opposite of the structured Beaux Art training Ruth had received at RISD. Indeed, she recalls, it was very difficult at first. I was not prepared for it. There was no direction. I was deposited into a studio and told, create. However, after a few months, Ruth came to embrace the Cranbrook design philosophy, recalling, quote, once I realized that there were no limitations except those posed by myself, I produced. It was the most exhilarating experience to watch my work unfold from day to day. So we see her in this photo. Isn't this great? So that's Ruth during her time at Cranbrook. And this is a photo of Saarinen House that relates to the next passage. Ruth credits Adler Schnee with instilling in her the discipline, energy, and stamina required to achieve perfection in design. She recalls that graduate students were invited to the Saarinen House. She writes, Loya would be ensconced on a hard bench, cushioned only by her tapestries, draped from the ceiling across the seat and to the floor, which you see right there. Adler sat on his ceremonial chair, where he always said he was exceedingly comfy, and we students lounged at their feet. She continues, there, and I might add, not as much in a classroom, I learned the philosophy which has governed my entire life, one that she adds would make my life so very difficult, but so very rewarding. Reading Ruth's aforementioned MFA thesis, completed in advance of her May 1946 graduation, it is clear she was poised to take on the next challenge in her professional career. She boldly writes, quote, the new is now. There is no reason to fight for the acknowledgement of contemporary design. Fight to bring the future design into the contemporary background. Little did she know that fight would be her life's work. Ruth's career took on another momentous turn after her graduation from Cranbrook in May of 1946. Inspired by Adler Schnee, she entered the Chicago Tribune Better Homes for Better Living competition, which sought fresh and interesting ideas for post-war home decor. On April 12, 1947, she received a telegram telling her that she had won a $100 prize, but more important, publicity for her design, which was this modern Michigan-style house. On the left is one of the different designs that she had submitted for the competition. Because she couldn't find appropriate draperies for the large window walls, she designed them herself in bold colors and abstract patterns. And one of her fun stories is she got a call from an architectural firm who had seen this drawing and wanted to produce these, wanted to purchase these modern style, large scale window coverings for automotive showrooms. Ruth responded that not only were they not on the market, they were just a figment of her imagination. So no, they said, we'll give you money and you can produce them. And she said, yes. At the time, silkscreen printing had been done primarily on paper and not on cloth, and certainly not in bold colors and abstract shapes. But Ruth was undeterred. She found a studio on 12th Street in Detroit and commissioned a 30-foot table with screens for printing. She then discovered the perfect medium. Textiles were hard to get because of the wartime, or the post-war time, and so she discovered that tailor's canvas was cheap and available, but also durable and absorbed the dyes without obscuring the texture of the fabric. She then set about teaching herself the silkscreen process. She said, nobody taught us how to do it, we just had to pick it up and learn it. Before long, she had produced 3 designs, slits and slats, which we see in this photo, pits and pods, and slinky shadows. Ruth Adler was in the textile business. However, while the aforementioned educational, personal, and professional experiences had laid the framework for her design career, Ruth needed a partner in order to fully cultivate her artistic vision and to share it with a wider audience. Enter Eddie. It's fitting that Ruth's earliest memory of Adler Schnee involves textiles. He had come to dinner, Sunday dinner at the Adler home as a guest of a family friend during the late summer of 1947. Ruth brought out her textile design pits and pods, which we see on screen, and she recalls that Eddie absolutely flipped, saying, "That's what I want for my room." She later saw the room and said that it had nothing to do with, like, her textile would not even fit there, but that was his story. In keeping with Ruth's entrepreneurial spirit, she made Eddie pay full retail price, even though he did the silk screening himself. While many young suitors would have been deterred, Eddie, who was a Yale University graduate in economics, was impressed, saying later, "That made me see what a good business person she is." They married on May 23, 1948, and a unique personal and professional partnership was born, one perfectly encapsulated in Ruth's textile design, Germination. Germination was conceived during Ruth and Eddie's honeymoon trip to Arizona and Colorado. Ruth explains, quote, "I had never seen the West. It was a life-changing experience to view the red layers of soil against the vast blue western sky. The biomorphic shapes between the horizontal stratified earth forms became the seed pods." Eddie named the design. Eddie named all of her designs, even before they came off the drawing board, and even helped with the silk screening. And I love the names: loopholes, swizzles, fission chips, F-I-S-S-I-O-N, are some of my favorites. And there we see Eddie's silk screening in the upper left. Perhaps more importantly, Eddie served as Ruth's aesthetic advisor and sounding board. Indeed, it was Eddie's suggestion to, quote, "leave out those little seed pods and concentrate on the horizontal lines," that contributed to the evolution of Germination into a new design, strata, which we see here, and we see it draped, but it just has the lines and not the seed pods. In 1950, Strata won the International Celanese Corporation Prize, launching Ruth into the national limelight and ushering in a new role for Eddie as the public face of the couple's budding retail business. Susan Brown writes in her catalog essay that by 1950, Ruth's studio employed 2 printers and produced 75 yards of fabric per day. And these printings included Strata, which we see in this newspaper article on the left, but also custom printings such as Strata Echo, which we see in the center, which was a 2-color variation of Strata made for architect and friend Louis Redstone. On the right, we see Stratum, which was a later incarnation of Strata that was done for her alma mater, RISD, for wrapping paper. The following decades would witness the growth and evolution not only of Ruth's design career, but also of the Adler Schnee partnership, manifested concretely in the Adler Schnee retail stores in Detroit, Michigan, and thematically in Ruth's textile design entitled My Neighborhood, which we see at the left. Indeed, throughout its 28-year run, Adler Schnee maintained a dual mission: 1, to promote the best in modern design, and 2, to foster a vibrant community culture in Detroit. So I'll read this quote, and this was pure Eddie. "Today, when faceless plastic shopping centers march across the face of America, come to Harmony Park in the heart of the city and meet some real people. The shopkeepers who surround this cozy little park are bright, vivacious, determined people here to make this city blossom." Ruth recalls that Eddie had decorated the back wall of their first showroom, which you see on the left, which was on 12th Street in Detroit, with Strata wallpaper, which you see on the back wall. They also spent their savings to stock a wide variety of housewares and home furnishings, including white Rosenthal china and Eames plywood chairs. And I love the this promo says our planning section and showroom contemporary, of course. Early customers were few but dedicated. In fact, due to financial constraints, some even purchased modern merchandise from drawings that were done on the wall of the studio because they didn't have enough money for the catalogs. Most importantly, though, the store showcased the symbiotic division of labor that would characterize the couple's relationship. Ruth, the designer, was always at work behind the scenes, and Eddie, the Yale University economist, ran the retail business. Ruth credits Eddie with keeping the business afloat, recalling that he spent hours on the sales floor explaining the simplicity of modern design to anyone who came in to listen, whether or not they bought anything. The magic of his salesmanship included displaying the Bauhaus-inspired Jenna glass teapot on a pure white marble cube like a piece of sculpture. It would later be displayed in a similar manner in the Museum of Modern Art. So Eddie was definitely ahead of his time. The store got a boost in sales in September of 1949 with the opening of For Modern Living, a groundbreaking exhibition of modern design for the home at the Detroit Institute of Arts. The exhibition was conceived by modern master Alexander Girard in conjunction with Eero Saarinen and Minoru Yamasaki, and it showcased like more than 2,000 items of modern design for the home, including, and you can see up here, textiles. Ruth Adler Schnee's textile ship shape was included, so I believe she's the sole surviving exhibitor from the exhibit. We also have all kinds of modern items from typewriters to toys to dishware, etc. This is a great catalog with a Saul Steinberg image on the front, very satirical. The exhibition culminated in an installation of modern-style rooms designed by Alvar Aalto, Florence Knoll, Charles Eames, George Nelson, and others, set in the DIA's Great Hall. So this is what the DIA's Great Hall looks like today. This is what it looked like in 1949. So pretty amazing how it was camouflaged with live trees and ramps and all these wonderful modern items. Significantly, the exhibition was sponsored by Detroit department store J.L. Hudson's, which was not known for carrying modern merchandise. As Ruth explains, fortunately for us, Hudson's did not educate its sales personnel in modern design, so people came to us. We spent hours explaining that the rough upholstery on the chairs was not burlap, but Belgian linen, and why we loved white Rosenthal china to showcase the food. We decided if these people want to buy modern furnishings, why don't we supply them? That was the beginning of our store. Inspired by the new business, Adler Schnee moved into a new, larger space on Puritan Avenue in Detroit, one with more windows to display its wares. Adler Schnee continued to print textiles, including draperies for the Winkleman's department store, which was led by executives and friends Ben and Edna Goldstein. One key yet controversial commission was the offices and auditorium of the Ford Rotunda, which you may know was later destroyed by a fire. So these are some of the draperies. The Winkleman's was trying to change its image, be kind of more fun and hip, and so these textiles went right along with that. And this is a fun story that Ruth likes to tell, that she was out of inspiration for these textile draperies for Ford, and Eddie suggested, how about just F-O-R-D, F-O-R-D? And she said that was the easiest yes she ever got from a client. They loved it. The problem was when the textiles came back from being, she discovered that it had been done backwards. And so they thought, this is going to ruin us. We're going to have to redo these, these draperies. And they decided just to let it pass, and no one noticed. And eventually the Ford Rotunda burned down. So I think Ruth Adler Schnee was probably the only person who was slightly relieved when the Ford Rotunda burned down. Ruth's work received considerable critical acclaim at the time, even garnering inclusion in a November 1954 Life magazine article, Mathematics by the Yard. Significantly, the image, which envisioned an architectural structure clad in boldly colored and patterned textiles, provided the inspiration for the Cranbrook show. So I think that's was a wonderful concept from the beginning. Significantly, in 1958, Ruth won the coveted Good Design Award from the Museum of Modern Art, but sadly, the award did not help sales. Indeed, while corporations like Ford and aesthetically adventurous clients like the Goldsteins embraced modern styling, most Detroiters still favored traditional fabrics and furnishings in their homes. And many modernist architects, including close friend Minoru Yamasaki, embraced a minimalist, monochromatic modern aesthetic, rejecting bold patterns and colors. As Ruth recalls, it was not a rose garden. Things looked even more bleak in 1954 after a fire burned the store and all of its merchandise. In the aftermath, Ruth and Eddie traveled to California to visit friends Charles and Ray Eames, and this is their magnificent Santa Monica home, one of the case study home project. Ruth recalls that Eddie told the Eameses, "We love what we're doing, but no one else does. We can't make a living like this." She also recalls vividly Charles Eames's response, "Don't worry, if it's well designed, it will sell." And you've probably heard this before because I love this story, but she always qualifies his comment by saying, "He was right, but he didn't tell us it would take 50 years. The California visit solidified Ruth and Eddie's resolve to persevere in the face of adversity, a courage rooted in Ruth's early family history and her Cranbrook training. As she recalls, "We supported each other. We were pretty much used to the rejection of modernism, and it didn't deter us. We were totally committed to our dream." After the fire, Adler Schnee moved to its third site on Livernois Avenue, a street known as the Avenue of Fashion, and located across from the University of Detroit's Architecture School, which facilitated connections with local architects. Around this time, Ruth's primary focus as a designer shifted from textile design to interior architecture and space planning projects. This is kind of a fun advertisement featuring Ruth herself. This is a little bit later, but this is one of her interior space planning designs, the Rosenthal residence, dating to 1958. And in fact, she did during this time period major corporate commissions for the Winkleman's and Kern's department stores and interior commissions for architects Minoru Yamasaki, James Kahn, and Louis Redstone for the Goldstein, Schur, Rosenthal, and Markley residences, and many more. The move was inspired by the increasing demands that Ruth faced working, running a store, and raising a family, which by then included Anita, born in 1949, Jeremiah, born in 1951, and Daniel, born in 1954. Ruth was aided, however, by Eddie, who provided household help, took care of the children very often, and never critiqued the fact that Ruth didn't cook, saying, quote, "I didn't marry you for that," unquote. So pretty ahead of his time in that sense as well. All three children remember being taken along to construction sites and, meetings with clients, but also dishing out ice cream from a truck parked in front of the Livernois store as part of this promotion with Mr. Softy. However, one could say that Ruth's, at the time, new move to interior architecture actually represented a return to her design roots at Cranbrook and to the concept of total design promoted by the Saarinen at Cranbrook, a design concept in which site, structure, and furnishings were integrated. And Eliel Saarinen always said that you design something for the next largest environment. You design the chair for the room, and the room for the house, and the house for the site. In fact, in Ruth's 1946 MFA thesis, she had actually described the ideal modern house as, quote, "a flexible, mobile surrounding for dynamic, moving people." And here we see the concept in material form. I think this one's dated January of 1946, and she used this design, I think, as part of her entry for the Better Homes competition in 1947. However, in Ruth's new designs for residential interiors, such as the Rosenthal and Markley residences, Ruth brought these concepts to concrete reality. Here she created, in her own words, an aesthetic unity, not only of pattern, color, and texture, which you would see in textiles, but also of space and light. As Gabe Wilson writes in his catalog essay, Ruth's interior design work, quote, brought good design into everyday homes and lives, unquote. And I'm showing you on screen is the Rosenthal residence and the Markley residence. On the upper right, this is from Curbed. I think this is from last year when that same residence that we see over here was up for sale. So I don't know whatever happened to that, who bought it. But you could see that they definitely maintained like a lot of the teak wood and the wood paneling on the fireplace, that kind of conversation pit type of a concept. So I hope it still looks like that. This is the Markley residence. This was a Louis Redstone creation. She has the Barcelona stools. There's a screen by Bertoya. Evidently, she's painted the staircase orange. She said that was one of her favorite commissions. Most importantly, perhaps, Ruth never let her vision or that of the architect compromise the functional and aesthetic needs of the client. She famously stood up to Yamasaki when he challenged the comfortable, colorful interiors that she had conceived for the Goldstein house. While Yami, as she calls him, was a personal friend, she recalls that he critiqued her work severely and in front of the client. Ruth refused to back down, and she ended up winning out. The Goldsteins were on her side. Yeah, and I think the photo at top, like I said, was from Curbed, and I think it was shot by Robert San Martin. Just love that. Beginning in September of 1964, Ruth and Eddie's efforts were focused on a new venture, the fourth iteration of the retail store, dubbed Adler Schnee on Harmony Park. Their decision to move their store from its previous location in Northwest Detroit to the downtown area was shocking at the time, when most businesses were moving out of the city. Eddie and Ruth clearly viewed the store not only as a commercial venture, but also as a stimulating force in the downtown area. Reminiscent of Marie Adler's old and new adage, the Adler Schnee store, located in the historic Hemeter building, merged old world architectural charm with an avant-garde aesthetic sensibility. Former customers, and hopefully some of you will share your experiences because I'm too young for that, will describe the store's magical atmosphere, marked by explosions of color, as we see in the Copco enamelware and Marimekko fashions, and cultural surprises in the biomorphic furniture of Finnish designer Alvar Aalto, and in the folk art that they produced and sold from trips to Mexico and South America. And Eddie promoted this eclectic multicultural mix of merchandise in a lot of advertisements. And at a certain point in the 70s, I think Anita Schnee was very helpful with putting these together. This is actually Eddie wearing, which you're not supposed to do, but this is part of the promotions, right? Wearing a now iconic Noguchi paper lantern. While the couple's initial focus was on the store and its merchandise, Eddie and Ruth soon turned their attention outwards, organizing community events intended both to bring people into the store, but also to expand the store outwards to the surrounding community. So we see here they actually brought in a string quartet at one point, and later on, Ruth would do a textile called cadenza that was inspired by music, so I just put that there. Here's a great image of Ruth and Eddie from that time period. Here's another project they worked on, was to revitalize Monroe Street in Greektown by repainting and redecorating some of the storefronts so that they would be more cohesive and coordinated. And they actually won the Keys to the City of Detroit for that initiative. And a lot of these initiatives, I'd love to explore this in a larger book. I only scraped the surface, but a lot of the projects that they did in Detroit are actually the forerunners of some of the festivals that we have today. Today, the concept is known as placemaking, but Eddie and Ruth were already doing it back in the 60s. Adler Schnee stayed open even after the devastating events of the summer of 1967, not closing its doors until 1977. After 1977, Ruth and Eddie continued their design business under the name Schnee & Schnee Consultants until Eddie passed away in the year 2000. While the retail chapter of Ruth's career and her partnership with Eddie had ended, Ruth would discover new threads and revisit old ones during the next primarily independent phase of her career. These encompassed commercial partnerships, awards, exhibitions, and scholarly recognition, and preservation restoration. One could say that Ruth's drawing for threads on the left illustrates the continuing interplay between old and new in those last decades of her career. Let's start with the old. This drawing for threads was created in 1993 when Ruth was 70 years old. Significantly, she used the same architectural tools, the pencil, the T-square, and the triangle, and employed the same process that she has used throughout her entire career. So while she was always working in 2 dimensions, she was thinking in 3 dimensions, and we'll get into this later, but this is strings and things flat, and strings and things shown kind of the way it was meant to be shown, would be more draped. For Ruth, the design process begins with inspiration, which she finds everywhere, recalling her mentor Benson. In nature, in cityscapes, and even in my sewing basket. However, while Ruth is happy that others find joy in her designs, she describes her own creative process, both then and now, as excruciating. She explains, "The blank sheet of paper is daunting. The process of creating a new design can take as long as 2 years to complete. When asked how she knows the design is complete, she responds, 'I can't put it into words. It sings to me.' This time-tested process may explain the seemingly timeless appeal of Ruth's work, viewed back in the 50s as cutting edge, but now considered classic. She asserts, quote, 'I believe that good design is the art of problem solving. One has to create an aesthetic unity of pattern, color, and texture, and to address human needs. If that has been accomplished, it will never go out of style.' However, while Ruth used old, that is, traditional methods to create threads, the commission derived from a then new commercial partnership with ANZEA Textiles. It all began in 1993 when ANZEA's Mitzi Mills approached Ruth, wanting to reissue her iconic mid-century designs. Ruth, who had been focusing on interior architecture for decades, responded saying, 'You can't do that. Those designs never sold. If I'm going to work for you, I would like to create new designs which will sell.' Mitzi Mills agreed, and at the age of 70, and after a 30-year hiatus, Ruth Adler Schnee was back in the textile business. Let's see. Why is it not going to the next one? Let's see. Looks like it's frozen. Let's see if I can make it go ahead. There we go. No, there we go. Ruth's new work for ANZEA, including bells, birds, afar, birds in flight, pipe dreams, and threads, did sell. Best of all, threads won the Museum of Modern Art's 1995 Good Design Award, the same award that she had won back in 1958. Buoyed by this success, Ruth agreed to let ANZEA reissue several of her old, that is, archival designs, including slits and slats and WIREWORKS. And we see on the left is the archival version of WIREWORKS, which was inspired by a visit to Alexander Calder's studio back when she was in her student days. And on the right is the ANZEA textile version. Sorry, that's a little blurry. However, there was a new approach involved, both technical and conceptual, as the archival designs needed to be translated from a printed to a woven textile medium. As Susan Brown writes in her catalog essay, learning the capabilities of woven pattern constituted a second textile education for Ruth, one that she mastered. Ruth would reissue, that is, reimagine, more archival works for Knoll Textiles. These include Strata, which was reoriented. Remember, it was a horizontal format, first as Germination, then as Strata, but reoriented in a vertical format in a woven textile medium for use as hospital privacy curtains. And I would love to go to a hospital and see those curtains there. Has not happened yet. Knoll, like ANZEA, continues to commission new work from Ruth, who will turn 97 this May. Ruth's return to textile design in the 1990s corresponded with two interrelated phenomena. The first is the rediscovery of her work by museum curators like David Hanks and Krista Thurman, who included her work in exhibitions, and second, by a more general resurgence of interest in mid-century design. The first comprehensive celebration of Ruth's work came in 2009 when architect Ronit Eisenbach, filmmaker Terry Saris, and graphic designer Hannah Smotrich joined forces. Each had been concerned by the dearth of female designers in the canon. Their efforts resulted in the exhibition Ruth Adler Schnee, A Passion for Color, held in 2009 at the University of Maryland, and 2011, as we see here, in the Palazzo Mocenigo in Venice. It also resulted in the 2013 film, The Radiant Sun, which some of you saw a month ago, which introduced Ruth's amazing life story to a new audience. In 2013, a Cranbrook symposium, Michigan Modern Design That Shaped America, further highlighted the role of Michigan as a cradle of modern design and celebrated Ruth, then 90, as the sole survivor among modernist pioneers Eero Saarinen, Charles and Ray Eames, Florence Knoll, Minoru Yamasaki, and Alexander Girard. And here we see just a view from the exhibition. You can see that there's like all different types of design, architecture and cars and textiles kind of all together. In 2015, Ruth was named a Kresge Eminent Artist, an award honoring lifetime achievements in the arts and community life of Detroit. Indeed, while many designers leave a legacy through their work, Ruth is unique in that her life story is equally inspirational. And she, unlike the others, is still around to tell it. Today, at the age of 96, Ruth is still relevant and more than ever in demand for interviews, articles, and exhibitions. So what is Ruth Adler Schnee's legacy? In preparing this lecture, I actually looked up the word legacy and came up with the following relevant definitions. The first was a gift or bequest, and the second was something transmitted by or received from a predecessor. Keeping this in mind, I came up with three major aspects of Ruth's life that could be considered a gift to future generations. The first, of course, is her body of work. The second, her role as a woman designer. And the third, her status as a witness to history, both within and beyond Detroit. I won't spend any additional time discussing Ruth's body of work because I would like you to see it for yourself upstairs in the exhibition. But tell your friends and family that the exhibition closes in 2 weeks, so they better get here fast. I will spend some time, however, reflecting on Ruth's status as a woman designer. It was no doubt Ruth's practiced perseverance instilled from childhood that enabled her to withstand and triumph over the discriminatory practices that often subverted the contributions of women designers at the time. Like her older contemporary Georgia O'Keeffe, Ruth did not want to be recognized as a woman artist, but instead to be recognized on par with her male colleagues. She once stated, quote, "I am not a believer that women can't break the glass ceiling. If women do a good job and they are talented, they will get ahead. Chauvinism has never stopped me." Most importantly, Ruth has led by example, undaunted early in her training as the lone woman among 50 male architects in Raymond Loewy's office, as the first Jewish woman in the architectural design program at Cranbrook. When she was thwarted finding jobs in the field of architecture after her graduation from Cranbrook, Albert Kahn's firm supposedly told her when she applied, "This isn't a beauty shop," so I think that was a no. She forged her own uncharted path, designing award-winning textiles and imaginative and functional spaces for structures designed by leading mid-century architects such as Minoru Yamasaki, Eero Saarinen, Paul Rudolph, and Frank Lloyd Wright. And remember that she stood up to Minoru Yamasaki. All of this while co-running a retail store and raising 3 children. And, I might add, Ruth's quest for the new has never stopped. She is still designing, but more importantly, still learning. With the wider recognition of her work, Ruth has become a role model for a new generation of artists and designers, including fellow RISD and Cranbrook grad Ronit Eisenbach. There's a great photo of them at the exhibition opening in December. In her architecture classes, Eisenbach has used Ruth's work as an exemplar of 2 design concepts. The first is generative design, the transmission of design concepts from one generation to another. And the second is, generative design, the transformation of design concepts into different media, which we already talked about. And we see here, this is one of the students that Ronit Eisenbach had, Michelle Rubenstein, who translated Ruth's Bell's textile design into a screen. But also regeneration in design, that is the transmission of design concepts from one generation to another. In Eisenbach's words, Ruth's work provides a challenge for designers and viewers today to see the world around us as a field for inspiration, experimentation, and delight. And now for our final category. Ruth's life story, encompassing not only the mid-century period in Detroit, but also the wider stories of the Holocaust, the immigrant experience in America, the struggle of women designers for recognition, and the fall and rise of Detroit, makes her an invaluable witness to the turbulent and triumphant events of the last century. And I might add, an inspiring yet daunting subject for a biographical essay, especially one with a word limit, which I definitely exceeded. And for a 1-hour lecture, which I may also be exceeding. I will conclude my lecture by focusing on Ruth's work in Detroit, which is currently experiencing the economic and cultural revival that Ruth and Eddie both predicted so many decades ago. In recent decades, Ruth has leveraged her considerable amount of personal charisma, and I wish we could have her here. She wanted to be here, but if anyone who's met her knows all about that. And has also leveraged her status as a Detroit design icon to share her knowledge of the mid-century period and to support projects relating to modern architecture. In 2018, I traveled, let's see, I think I went too far, there we go. In 2018, I traveled with Ruth to Palm Springs, California, where she lectured at the Modernism Week conference. And these are 2 images. This one is with Susan Skarsgård, who just wrote a fabulous book and presented it here on the GM Tech Center. And this is Jerry Kavanaugh, who we just honored at Cranbrook as well, another iconic woman designer. And on the right is a photo from a Docomomo, Michigan event that we had in the fall of 2018, which was celebrating 2 iconic works by Minoru Yamasaki, one that had been repurposed and the other, the Reynolds Metals building, which was then in danger. Still not sure about what the status of that is, but Ruth always was ready to lend a hand, to provide a voice, to come and speak to, the crowds about her experiences with Yamasaki at the mid-century period. So very grateful for that. Around the same time, Ruth became personally involved in the preservation and restoration of 2 historic mid-century structures located, perhaps surprisingly, in the ultra-traditional Detroit suburb of Grosse Pointe. The first was Marcel Breuer's Grosse Pointe Central Library on the left, which she helped to save from the wrecking ball by identifying some of the treasures there, including an original Calder mobile, a Kandinsky tapestry. They, wanted a new library, just like everyone does, and they were about to demolish it. So very grateful for her intervention on that score. The second project, which is still ongoing, is the McLucas House on the right, the sole surviving private residence designed entirely by mid-century designer Alexander Gerard. Since 2013, Ruth has served as design consultant on the restoration, and this one is also in Grosse Pointe. The owners of the McLucas House, Rob, Mary, and John Lubera, and at least one of them is in the audience, will attest to the level of personal as well as professional dedication that Ruth puts into her work, even now in her 8th decade. This is the very first photo I took of Rob and Mary Lubera with Ruth, and I remember she had just met them, and I think she was kind of, why are you taking my picture, you know, kind of a thing. But here is a photo of Ruth with her kids, Jeremy, Danny, and Anita, in the house this past May. She just moved from Colorado permanently, and we were kind of having a little send-off for her. On that note, I am personally grateful to Ruth for the hours we spent, both over tea in her Southfield condo and on the road, discussing her memories of the mid-century period, which she addressed in her foreword to my 2018 book on Alexander Gerard's architecture. I love the photo on the left from my book launch at the DIA, and she signed a lot of books with me. That was probably her least favorite thing, this is the signing part. But she loved seeing people whenever we went out. And this is one of the last photos I have of her in her condo in Southfield. She's, of course, moved all of these wonderful things to Colorado. When asked how she feels about the current uber popularity of the mid-century modern aesthetic, she responds, quote, "I'm happy that I've lived long enough to witness it, but there should be more emphasis on its history and preservation." She adds, "I wish that Eddie were here to see it." Eddie remains an inspiration in Ruth's life. In fact, she still treasures the spools of thread in her sewing basket, which were one of Eddie's first gifts to her. While Ruth was initially disappointed by the gift, her mother explained, "He gave them to you because he loves you and your sense of color." It was then that Ruth realized that she had found the love of her life. I'm going to choke up here. She still has those spools of thread, every color that he could get his hands on today. One could say that these old and new threads have coalesced over time into a beautiful tapestry. Better yet to say that while Ruth's life and career has not always been a rose garden, she has without a doubt created the beautiful bouquet of flowers that her mother envisioned all those years ago. Thank you so much. I have no idea what time it is because this is it's like a running clock and it doesn't correspond to the actual time. So, but I think we have time for some questions. Okay, great. And again, just a reminder, we'd like to share some memories of Ruth. We have some cards. Yeah, if you need to leave, that's fine too. If you want to stay and ask questions. You can also, I think, go on the Cranbrook website. And you can also write some comments. It doesn't have to be about the store. It can be about anything. But please, if anyone has any questions. I want to see what time
I'm curious about her thoughts about Raymond Loewy as a designer, but also as a salesperson. And she learned anything from him, or was he just as sexist as many of the designers of his generation?
You know, she was remarkably resilient. She persevered through all of that. Like she said, chauvinism has never stopped me. She had a lot of good comments about, she said about the architects in Raymond Loewy's office, everyone was nicer than the next one. So I'm sure there was a lot of that going on, but she was very much influenced by that. She said in her letters, and it's just really fun to read these old letters, that she learned more in 2 days in Raymond Loewy's office than she learned at her whole time in RISD, whether that's 100% true or not. So I think she tried to take the good from, whatever experience she was in. In fact, when we were in Palm Springs 2 years ago, we were able to tour Raymond Loewy's house. And so I think she does look back on that in a positive light. I think the people that she worked with were good to work with.
Hi, Mark Garrison. So if the Adlers were struggling so much with the retail end of their business, how were they able to persevere all those years in retail without being successful at all?
That's a good question. I mean, it always was a struggle. I mean, she'll compare it with, so Alexander Gerard also had a design studio, but his wife, Susan, was from a very prominent Scarsdale family, and I think they had some extra support that kind of, mitigated that. So that's why Ruth took on all of these interior projects. So I think that made up the difference, because the textile design did not. And they obviously sold enough to stay afloat, but certainly was not. I mean, it's funny because a lot of times people will say to Ruth, oh, I see this Howard Miller clock, like, should I buy it? And she says, well, you should have bought it from me, a long time ago. So she still is a little prickly about that, but Eddie, I think you're right. I mean, it wasn't, he was really there to kind of preach to people about modern design as much as he was to sell. And Anita Schnee actually shared with me a whole long document, about her father, and I hopefully include this with some of the other comments. But she really praises his role as a salesman, but his dedication to the products, but also to the customers, because all of these designers, Gerard, Ruth Adler Schnee, all of them, they were really dedicated to making people's lives better through modern design. They really felt that would be a good way to do it. A lot of Detroiters just weren't there yet.
First, I want to compliment you on what you're wearing.
Thank you.
That's one of, as a first female of color to be admitted at Cranbrook as a student, I really, many things that you've mentioned just touched my heart so. And I was not a designer. I went on to become a sculptor. Sojourner Truth, that First Lady, Mrs. Obama, unveiled.
And I believe your work's at the U.S. Capitol, correct?
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Not about me so much as to come back here and be able to enjoy little bits of where I was fortunate enough to see that first home, an all-glass home of someone, and to go there and go through. And
great.
My husband and I purchased many of the designs of furniture. We just lived through the world of art and creativity.
Wonderful. Well,
Thank
I'm
you.
so honored that you're here. Oh my gosh. Artist Lane. And I would love to speak with you. So we'll definitely have to connect, because I would love to hear your story. Great.
Hello again. I'm Jan. So many of her early designs were large, and they were meant for large hangings and the tapestries, the curtains, that kind of things. But Maharam and Knoll, even though Knoll does some of the privacy screens, but Maharam and Knoll and ANZEA, they do fabric for furniture. So she had to change her design thought a bit in order to make fabrics applicable to upholstery fabric?
Yes, so the question, this is more for Ruth than it is for everyone else you can probably hear, but is kind of how did she have to adapt her mentality? And definitely, yes, I would recommend that people read Susan Brown's essay in the catalog, because she talks about that. You don't think about it, you can't just take the same, it's like if you're singing a song, if you're a musician, that there are different keys. You don't just, go ahead and sing a song or play music. You have to translate it, for the different functions that it would serve. So a lot of her original work was made to be draped. And, if you're doing upholstery fabric, that's very different. So, yeah, she did have to think differently. So I think it's fascinating that, at that age to be willing to do that. So we're very grateful that she was. Great, is that it with questions? But if people have other questions, feel free to come and ask me afterwards. And thank you so much for coming, and enjoy the exhibition.